Right, we're live now, and then takes maybe 30 seconds or so to get this going. I'll send it over to you. Right, that link should be with you now, Bob. Let me see. Tell me if you get that.
Yep, got it.
Okay, perfect. And remember to mute the video straight away so there's no echo.
Yep, that's muted.
Perfect. So for those who are just joining us at the moment, bear with us, because as you know, it takes a couple of minutes while we get everything sorted and ready to go. So yeah, give us 2 seconds here, guys. I'm gonna get this edited. Right, thumbnail. I'm going to change the thumbnail here so people can see it. Where are we at here? Right. Okay. So that's good there. Hi folks, just coming in the comments again, just give us 2 seconds while we get everything set up and we'll be ready to go for this live Q&A, which is going to be a good one because Bob has had a great career. He's flew the Harrier and also the Jaguar, but you were tweeting on one of the comments earlier, you had 3,000 hours on the Harrier. That's amazing, Bob.
Yeah, it's a lot of flights in the Harrier. They were not long flights.
Not long flights, yeah. Right, okay, so let me get this sent out otherwise. So can you see the comments on the side there, Bob?
Yeah, I'm just getting that sorted. I'm not getting that scrolling though.
It's usually just with your trackpad, that should work fine if you scroll up on the side there. So what can you currently see at the moment, Bob?
Okay, I've got 2 from Stephen there. The "Are you guys live?" and "I will wait."
Yeah, that is.
There's your hi, but I'm still not able to scroll those up and down at the moment.
Yeah, it's when they get down to the bottom, Bob, then you'll be able to scroll.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I've got that.
Right, okay, so I'm going to get that out to our Facebook. Again, guys, just bear with us. This is, as you know, it takes a couple of minutes to get this link out. So I'm going to put it on our Twitter page and our Instagram page. And if you want to follow us, just search Aircrew Interview, and also you'll get daily photos there. Right. But Bob, yes, obviously. So we'll get the question. Obviously, you probably know who Bob is already. He flew the Harrier GR3 and Jaguar. But Bob, if you can give us a brief overview of your flying career, that'd be great. Just while we get the questions coming in.
Yes, I'm wary now. I see a real expert popping up who's flown both of those jets before me.
Oh, Peter Harris.
So my flying career, I joined the Air Force after doing various other things, knowing nothing about the job whatsoever. So I did university, then I went into the motor industry for 3 years, got bored, joined the Air Force, and went through training on the Chipmunk, Jet Provost, through to Valley on the Hunter because I was too big for the Nat at the time, and straight from the Hunter to the Harrier. So that was 3 years worth of training before I got to the first squadron, where Peter Harris was one of the big guys there.
And then obviously you flew the Jag as well. So can you kind of tell us the difference between like flying the two, and what were the changes like coming from, a subsonic to a supersonic jet?
Well, to answer Peter's first question first, yeah, this beard takes longer to grow than it does to learn to fly the Harrier. Yeah, the two jets were very much similar machines. They were designed around the same era for a similar job mostly. If you look at the plan form of the original Harrier and of the Jaguar, they've got a similar 50-degree swept, high-loaded wing for good gust response, good ride at low level at high speed. The big difference was in how much power they had. And that was brought home to me when I was converting to the Jaguar. After many years on the Harrier, converting to the Jaguar, the first time I realized that we weren't doing the same thing was when I was on a bounced simulated attack profile. And when the bounce came in, I saw it first, and I turned and started fighting the bounce. And while giving the commentary, I realized it had gone very quiet, and everybody else had just accelerated and gone away, gone as low as possible in a straight line, because you really don't want to start turning with the Jaguar. If you turn with a highly loaded wing, you can get the turn rate, but you bleed off energy, you bleed off speed. With a Pegasus, you can put that speed straight back on pretty well. But the Jaguar, if you put both engines into reheat, which literally pours fuel out the back, and with those two engines in reheat together, you've got 2/3 of what the Pegasus gives you without any reheat. So it takes a long time to get the energy back. So there were differences in tactics, but the basic airframe is really quite similar.
Brilliant.
The premature retirement of the Harrier, I see there is one of the... that's a very political question, really. Yeah, it was too early. It was... the country was struggling financially. The Air Force, the armed forces were pretty bankrupt, and something had to go. And it was a toss-up between the Harrier and the Tornado. Ironically, the next conflict for which we needed something was in Libya, where a carrier would have been the ideal way of getting there. But it was too late then. But then again, the next conflict that came along after that, the Tornado was well suited to it. So it was not a clear-cut decision, but it was the easy one to do. As to learning how to fly the jet, it's quite a long course. It was a 6-month course. You had to learn, you first of all did a bit of helicopter flying to learn about flying an aircraft at 0 airspeed and landing in confined spaces. Then the conversion was, there were 21 sorties in the conversion course when I did it, because there's an infinite number of ways of taking off and landing in the airplane. And you were taught sort of marker stones along the way on the course, and then you could fill in the gaps yourself later on. So yeah, it's quite a long conversion. Was it supersonic? Yeah, you could get it supersonic. I actually remember during my first tour, we spent a lot of time in Belize in Central America, where Guatemala was threatening to invade. So we went there to help the deterrent. And the first time we were allowed off camp, when it quieted down a little bit, I was with the team that went out to the Keys. It's got the second largest barrier reef in the world, lovely desert islands all along it. And we went out there, and one of the working team who were back at base came and had a go at dropping a supersonic boom on our peaceful little island, Peter. Which aircraft would I like to fly if you had the choice? Well, I kind of like the F-16. That's a fun sort of airplane to fly. The big difference of the Harrier from other aircraft was that you never got bored with it. I flew it for 17 years, and I still treated it with respect. I could still learn new things every time I flew. With the Jaguar, I flew the Jaguar for 3 years, and pretty much that was it. Apart from updates we had to the avionics, there was not a lot else new to the airplane. As to the F-35, yeah, absolutely, it's a worthy successor. It's a real game winner, the F-35. It's not the same as the Harrier at all. Arguably, the Harrier 2 was not the same as the Harrier. The name was kept partly so that it wasn't seen as being an expensive new buy. It was an update, but it was very different. The F-35 is way ahead of that. It can't do some of the unprepared areas operation that the Harrier did because of the amount of thrust it puts out, but the way it fights the war is just wonderful. My very first Harrier flight and near accident. Well, near accidents happened all the time, and accidents were part of our life. I flew it for 17 years. During that time, I think, and there were, at any time in the RAF, there were about 100 of us doing the job. And during those 17 years, I think 22 of my colleagues died in accidents. So things went wrong all the time. Oh, my first trip in Harrier was my first familiar flight at 233 OCU at Wittering. It's a big airfield built for the V-Force, 9,000-foot runway, 2 parallel taxiways that can be used as runways. And my instructor at the end of the sortie decided he would demonstrate to me a rolling vertical landing on the furthest bit of the furthest runway. And this was on a Friday afternoon at about 5 o'clock. The pub was just opening. He landed and both the main tyres burst. Of course, I, as the student, had to take the blame for that, although I wasn't flying it. However, he maintained that I must have had my feet on the brakes. The Harrier boys' stories, well, they're other people's stories. I just put them together. Volume 1 is my era, the first 20 years. And I just talked to old friends about what we'd done, put them together in a reasonably logical order. The second volume is where we step forward into the next era of Harrier flying. I've included some of the old stuff at the beginning to connect the two together. So yeah, I enjoyed that series. Pegasus engine, it never let me down, no. I was talking earlier about damage to aircraft. I damaged quite a few Harriers. I never wrote one off. And the engine was remarkably tough. It had a big rotating first stage, which was pretty good at chopping up birds. So it would take a lot of punishment. And I brought engines back that really ought not to have carried on flying. They were good. The hovering in the GR3, yeah, it required practicing. The big difference from a helicopter was you couldn't see downwards. You couldn't see much below shoulder level. You were tightly enclosed in a little cockpit with high cockpit rails, and you could only see fairly distant from where you were. So you needed to align on distant features, which, if we've got a prepared pad, we'll put out marker boards so that there were two in a line pointing towards the center of the pad at 90, and these were in 90-degree intervals around the pad. So you had to use two sets of these markers to get an intersection of lines where the center of the pad was, and then land with your head a bit forwards of the center of the pad so that the rear of the jet wasn't off it. The stability in the hover, during the time I was flying it, we introduced auto-stabilization, which made it a little bit easier, but was quirky and could go wrong. In the Harrier 2, it had a much, much heavier stabilization system and was not naturally a stable airplane. But in the GR3, once you got used to the idea, it was okay. It was interesting taking other fast jet pilots flying in the Harrier. They would be fine. Taking off, yeah, it accelerates very well. They'd be impressed by that. Flying around at low level, yeah, it's like any other 420, 480 knots, 7 miles a minute or so. It's what they're used to. When you slowed down on the approach and went below 130 knots, then they started to tense up. And it got a very clever wing where, for those of you who are familiar with aerodynamics, the classic lift curve goes up and up and up until it suddenly drops down when you get to the limiting angle of attack. In the Harrier, the lift curve was symmetrical, so you never felt it stall. It gradually stalled and the lift decreased, and you had to replace that with thrust pointing it downwards. Being radarless was something that we assumed as part of the aircraft. We aimed to operate with zero emissions. We didn't want anybody to know we were there. At the time of those early, throughout the years of the Cold War, really, we didn't have reliable electronic countermeasures. So you aimed to fly under radar. You aimed to make no emissions so that people couldn't figure out where you were. Different versions of the Harrier had radar. The C Harrier did, the AV8B Plus did. It could be useful, but it's more for air-to-air than anything, which was not our forte. Air combat against the new series jets, 15s, 16s. Yeah, they were many years later. They were better jets for combat. The F-15, if it knew what it was doing, would shoot you down before you ever saw it. The F-16 would generally turn better. However, we did fight both in the GR3, and we were known to get good results against them. I saw some very indignant United States Air Force F-15 pilots return from the ACMI at Dissimilar out in Sardinia, where as we entered the area, they came in right at the top of the area, looking down with their radars. Our two GR3s came in 180 degrees out, right at the bottom of the area, as fast as they could possibly manage. And when they saw the contrails of the two F-15s, they pulled up together in formation until they were about to run out of airspeed and fall out, and then fired all their sidewinders straight up in the air. And they got 2 kills. So it was a cheat, but it worked. Different geographical locations. If it was hot, the performance of the aircraft was much less than in cold conditions. And we practiced in both. I mentioned before, we went to the tropics because there was a bit of a war on. And yeah, you would sometimes struggle for hover performance there, but you got water injection, which could help restore that. We also used to exercise every year up in the north of Norway at Tromsø, well inside the Arctic Circle, very cold. You actually became limited as to how much power you could use because there was a danger of surging the engine. Anybody who wants to have a chat about aerothermodynamics and non-dimensional RPM later, just give me a call. Out of the Jag and the Harrier, which would get 600 knots quicker, well, it would depend on the fit of the aircraft. The initial acceleration of the Harrier was much, much better than the Jaguar, but it would start to slow down. Its acceleration would decrease at high airspeeds. So from 450 upwards, the Jaguar would be catching up. There was, again, I keep referring to my audience, that I witnessed a race between a Harrier and an F-104 at Wittering, where somebody listening knows this better than I. we used two-seaters, and we put somebody from the other team in the back seat to see no cheating. It was from brakes off to 10,000 feet was the race. And the F-104 went off, and it was mighty impressive. Lots of noise, and they'd stripped off everything. They'd stripped off the tip tanks, the whole lot, so it was internal fuel only. And it accelerated down the runway at a very impressive speed, rotated to just about vertical, and disappeared into the cloud. And we're thinking, oh dear, that's difficult to follow. Then the Harrier, flown by bomber, it trundled gently down the runway, nipped into the air, carried on at the same attitude, more or less, and off it went. And the Harrier won by an impressive margin, because the Harrier was climbing from just after opening the throttle, whereas the 104 had to accelerate down the runway to get its little wings to do anything. So it's difficult to compare the two. Jaguar on one engine was a struggle. The Jaguar instrument rating test was an impressive test of what the aircraft could do, because from takeoff, as soon as you were safely airborne, you would close the throttle on one engine, and you would have to fly a heavyweight, single-engined instrument landing system approach back to the airfield you'd just taken off from. Later on and you'd have to do clever stuff like joining airways and flying an airway segment, but then you would do a simulated loft attack where, and the pilot who's taking the test is in the front behind screens. He cannot see out of the front of the aircraft. He can only see the instruments. And a target would be set into the kit, and you would have to fly the aircraft in at low level, in burner at 540 knots, and then the computer would tell you when to pull up. It's about a 4G pull-up. You would follow the pull-up instructions until it figured you got into range, and it would do an automatic bomb release. And at that point, you would have to cancel the burner, bank to 135 degrees of bank, pull down until the nose sliced through the horizon, reduce the bank to 90 degrees, keep pulling and descending until you got back to low level on the reciprocal heading and roll out and run away. So that was quite a complicated way of doing things. But yeah, one engine was definitely an emergency. Things seem to happen to me on conversion sorties. I've already told you about the start of my Harrier conversion. On my Jaguar conversion, which incidentally, that's another story, was a refresher course I was given. I'd never flown it before, so I'm doing a refresher course. However, on trip one, I'm in the front, instructor's in the back, and we take off with two engines. Never done that before, playing with two throttles. So off we went, flew around, did a few takeoffs and landings. Trip two, the QFI demonstrates to me the single engine performance. I think, well, yeah, he's going to throttle back one engine. No, he shut down one engine. So this is really on one engine. Oh, all right, we'll do that. Relit, and on we went. The third sortie is supposed to be the one before your solo. Well, it was the one before the solo. On this one, we were to do a reheat climb to 30,000 feet, which is something I've never seen. And this was 2 days before Christmas, up in Lossiemouth, north of Scotland. And it was a very cloudy day. And we took off, climbed up, and something started to go wrong. And my head-up display was telling me that the Mach number was getting greater and greater as we climbed. And I was pulling steeper and steeper to stop this happening, because with external tanks, you shouldn't go supersonic. And neither of us realized what was happening until we popped out of the top of this cloud, near vertical at 30,000+ feet. And it was freezing cloud, which may have accounted for the instrumentation problem. At this point, I pushed the nose forwards because I hadn't got much airspeed, which the Jaguar doesn't like. So both engines went ba-bang. I closed the throttles, And it initially went very quiet. Then it got very noisy as all the warnings came on, because both engines had stopped at this stage. Well, on trip 3, I'm not really qualified for this, so it was over to you, QFI. Would you like to sort this one out? Apparently, it was quite funny back at Lossiemouth, because they're all sort of getting rid of Christmas parties and things. When the tannoy goes out from air traffic, going, Jaguar, state 2, 30 miles north, double flame out, recovering for priority landing. That'd be interesting, going 30 miles with no engines. However, they did relight when we got to the prescribed height, and down we went. I'll just have to scroll down. These Jindivik, I never fired an air-to-air missile, so I'm sorry I can't answer that one. 7 seconds was the margin between the 104 and the T4, I'm told. Yes, I have been on winter exercises in Norway. Very interesting. We would fly from rolled snow. So you're on an ice rink, basically. Then we would return to Wittering, and they wouldn't let us fly if there was a few flakes of snow about. Harrier air displays. Yes, I did 4 years of Harrier air displays. I did 2 years in Germany, covering all the continental Europe. And I did another 2 years back in UK, with mostly UK, with the odd one in France and near continent. Supersonic, the Jaguar was more supersonic than the Harrier. You used to air test it to supersonic speed routinely, but you didn't fly it without external tanks normally. So yes, it could go supersonic, but you weren't allowed to unless it was clean. Yeah, this was 1970s we're talking about. They'd sorted out most transonic problems by then. The Hawk, when I went back to that was a very good trainer for transonic flying. It had classic symptoms that you could see, and you could see them come and go away again. Something that surprised me as a pilot. Don't know. I can't think of anything that surprised. Well, I'll tell you a little story of a scary situation that caught me out. This is one of those things you should realise. It was out in Belize. It had a common factor which I saw quoted in many accidents. There was a TV crew filming, and our brief was we were to go and shoot weapons at a splash target, towed target behind one of Her Majesty's grey boats out over the sea. And unusually for the Caribbean, it was a very grey day. The sea was a bit grey, the boat was grey, the sky was grey. We did our shooting of, I think we did the guns first, and then we did the rockets, because we were going to finish off with full pods of rockets. And we fired off these full pods of rockets and managed to destroy the target, which meant they got to go and make themselves a new one. But having done this, I was number 2, and because the weather wasn't very nice, I got fairly close to my leader to go back home. And then he got a call from the ship saying, oh, the TV crew would just like to get another one of you flying past together if you could. So I was in Arrow, which is a loose echelon formation. And my leader turned back to where we'd left the ship, couldn't see it, cruised around, saw the ship down on his right-hand side. So Cordy was turning hard, which I turned with him. I was in close formation at that stage, but I dropped back because he was turning so hard. I dropped back, and he went to fly down the right-hand side of the ship, along the length of the ship. And he'd snapped into this turn. I was in Arrow. He snapped out of this turn, and I stayed where I was, concentrating on him, and saw the ship just at the last moment. and then realized I was also seeing in my peripheral vision on the right, the sea, because he'd rolled out to about 30 degrees of bank from an 80-degree bank turn. So I was now below my leader going past the ship, which was not a good idea. I leveled the wings and pulled hard, and there was a bang. And in fact, yes, we'd had practice bombs on as well. So I got a bomb carrier on the center line, and the bang I feared was the bomb carrier hitting the sea. But as it turned out, it was just a Harrier thing. The nose wheel, when it's retracted, was just held up by a hydraulic lock, and if you pulled hard enough, it would break free and hit the undercarriage door. So that was a scary thing. Jaguar on an on-runway, never. Jaguars didn't do that often. They did trials early on. It was all right on motorways, but not on anything unprepared. It dug a lot of furrows when it tried that. Landing grass surfaces are a bit of a science in themselves. You would use a device we colloquially called the pogo stick because it's shaped like one. It's actually a cone penetrometer, and you would have to check the hardness of the ground at the surface and 6 inches below the surface before you would land anything on it. For the Harrier, you would also check the surface smoothness, and the test for that was to drive a Land Rover at 50 miles an hour down the strip, and if you could keep hold of the steering wheel, is good enough for the Harrier. But the Jaguar, it had a low weight loading on the wheels, but the nose wheel in particular would dig in a bit, and you really don't want a nose wheel bog in. But it was a generally rugged undercarriage. It's described here. It was generally rugged, but oddly enough, during my time on it, it started to break, and it was there was a big pivot point at the top of the undercarriage, top of the main legs, where cracks started. And cracks, they're apparently, it being an Anglo-French aeroplane, bits were made all over the place. And apparently the undercarriage legs, left and right, were made in different factories. And one of them started cracking after it got quite old. So, yeah, that needed a bit of work. Let me go up here. Yeah, which aircraft would I like to fly in the RAF? Either of them. I'd be delighted to fly either of those. US Marine Corps, we did a lot with the US Marine Corps. We always had at least one US Marine Corps pilot on exchange with us, and we learned quite a lot of good things from them and taught them a few, it has to be said. If anybody's seen those pictures going around tonight of a big Harrier formation, there's a US Marine Corps pilot in there who went on to become the top aviator of the US Marine Corps. And he took back with him a lot of our standard operating procedures and introduced them to the Marine Corps. Air-to-air refueling in the Harrier was reasonably straightforward in that it was, because you'd got an aeroplane that you could maneuver quite sensitively. But yes, the position of the probe was not good because it was up high on your left-hand side and difficult to actually look at that and look at where it's going. Air-to-air refueling generally on UK probe and drogue, you've got a 20-inch wide basket. So you're flying at, I don't know, 400 miles an hour, and you're approaching an aircraft also flying at 400 miles an hour, and you've got to get a part of your aircraft within 10 inches of a point in the sky at an appropriate speed. So that's a bit of a challenge. And it's also difficult because of the probe being up on the left-hand side. If you want to move it sideways, you bank. And if you bank and it's up there, it goes up and down rather than left and right. So there's a bit of a trick to it. Jaguar was quite a game in itself. It had a probe that folded out of the side of the airframe in front of you on the right-hand side, which was nice, but the engines didn't like it being there. That came up in front of the right-hand intake and could cause airflow problems. So what you did was put the right engine in full dry power, put on a switch which gave you reheat at a lower throttle range on the left-hand engine. So you put a probe out on the right-hand side, which gives you drag on the right, makes the aircraft yaw to the right. You put less power on your right-hand engine, which makes the aircraft yaw to the right. Then you give more power on the left-hand engine, which makes the engine yaw. So you ended up with a lot of rudder trim on to get it right. The most difficult I ever tried with a Jaguar was air-to-air refueling at the end of an air test when I got no stores on at all. And I got too much power. I just didn't know what to do. Did I ever do an exchange tour? No, I didn't. I never did red flag. I did the only flag exercises I did both Harrier and Jaguar maple flag in Canada, which were just wonderful. An amusing thing there was my last Harrier flag exercise. I had to discipline some of I'd become a grown-up adult at this stage. I had to discipline some of our junior pilots because they were in a competition to see who could fly lowest out in the training area. And they were flying down avenues between trees because there were big long fire breaks cutting the forest. And when watching some of the film of this going on, I said, stop, rewind that film, go back again. And you could just see in the bottom of this quite low down Harrier head-up display film, you could see a fin go across very quickly from right to left. That was a French F1 flying at some ridiculous height down another fire break. So we pointed out the dangers and let them get on with it. Two-seater Harrier, yes, it had a refueling probe. Two-seat Jaguar, it did have the two-seat Jaguar did not have a refueling probe in the UK version. Yeah, so you did check out on the two-seater in the Harrier. In the Jaguar, you were taken to the tanker and you were shown the position. What you used really for getting into the tanker was there were markings on the wing, and you would line these up and you would drive in on those. So you'd be shown this position in the two-seat Jaguar, but you had to remember, if you were the instructor, not to go too far away because you couldn't get any more fuel. Yeah, refueling, the whole trim changed. There was a quick one up here about the Hunter. Yeah, I flew the Hunter in training. So I flew the Hunter for advanced flying training and for the tactical weapons unit. It was a lovely airplane. I enjoyed that a lot. No, I didn't. I've never fired an air-to-air missile at all. The Jaguar's wing was, as I've already said, a tiny wing that didn't produce much lift, which made it all the more puzzling that it didn't have ailerons either. It had a tailplane that moved differentially for a taileron, and it had spoilers on top of the wing. So to induce roll, you applied more drag, or you dumped lift on an airplane that didn't have much lift already. So it was kind of odd. Radon airfields. I mean, generally we aim to go to war in the old days, not on an airfield. And that was kind of proven by Gulf War I, where hazards became prime targets. However, we did have procedures for survival scrambles, where we would get airborne, everybody airborne, with whatever weapons you've got, and see what you could do to do your best. I think I can't remember whether Peter was on the same push as me. We did one of those in Belize, where we thought there was an inbound raid. we all launched before dawn, and the brief there was to go beyond the missile engagement zone around the airfield. And we only had guns loaded at that stage. So if we could see any of the incoming attack aircraft, we would try and gun them down. But if they managed to get past us, as they would, then the missiles would supposedly take care of them as they went through the airfield. And then we were to go and rearm and go down and try and catch them at their base. Longest flight in a Jaguar, I don't think I ever did more than about 3 hours in a Jaguar, because I never did any transit flights to anywhere. In the Harrier, I did 7.5. Favourite weapon? Forward firing weapons are more fun. So the forward firing rockets, SNEB, were used for practice. They were good fun. And guns. The special weapons I mentioned here, special weapons were no longer carried by the Jaguar when I got to it. That went out many years ago, and they were never included in the Harrier inventory. No, you would never aim to fly with asymmetric loads. I saw somebody exploring an asymmetric load. We did a firepower demonstration out of a field site in Germany, and the load was guns with HE ammunition, 30mm, and SNEB pods. And the SNEB pods, we had 4 SNEB pods on the aircraft, and they were the operational ones, which fired all the rockets and then fired the pods off their pylons. So it cleaned the aircraft completely. Because we'd had problems with the frangible fiberglass nose cones damaging the aircraft, we flew without those. So first of all, does anybody know a calculation for taking off with this configuration? No, we'll let the boss go first and we'll follow him. So we did this, but one of the guys had a pod failure where it started firing, but then stopped. So he got a pod on an outboard pylon with an unknown number of rockets in it, and he got to come back and land vertically at the field site, which could have been interesting, but turned out to be not a big deal. Efficient at night. Well, by the time I went to the Jaguar, the second generation Harrier was coming in. Now, I'd been involved in that. I was in the operational requirements division of the Ministry of Defence when the GR7 was coming in, and we were working on getting all the night clearances, and it was properly optimized for night flying. Now, in the Jaguar, we came to the game a bit late, and I flew once doing a go at night flying in the Jaguar, and that was purely on night vision goggles, and it was scary. Flying low level in formation, looking through very narrow tubes is not good. In the Harrier, you had forward looking infrared as well, so you got a television screen picture of what was in front of you, and you could reproduce that on your head-up display. You can get an overlay of the infrared picture out in front of you. So the second generation Harrier, GR7, GR9, was much, much better. But the Jaguar sort of caught up with modifications. Again, that was interesting because I went from the Harrier force beginning to transition through to operational requirements, then onto the Jaguar. And on the Jaguar, it started with the Balkans campaign, where we wanted to use tiled for designating weapons. And to prove the concept of using tiled in a single-seat aircraft, we'd flown in a back of a fag packet design of an aircraft down at Boscombe Down, designed by an old Harrier pilot, has to be said, so they could fly it as if a single-seater, but with a safety pilot in the other seat. And when there was a call for more of these, the simple solution was to put them on a Jaguar and go and fly the Jaguar with the Harrier out over Bosnia. Now, that was seen as a quick fix, and we asked the design authority, British Aerospace, would they like to supervise this? And they declined, saying this is an obsolescent aeroplane. Right, thank you very much. So we went to Boscombe Down and Farnborough between them, did this in-house for a fraction of the price, in a fraction of the time, got 12 aircraft modified to do this job, using a gaming company to design a simulator for us, and got a very good quick solution. But with that experience, we were able to go on and do the GR3 Jaguar modifications, again on a shoestring, and get very good results. Let me try and see what else I've got here. Squadrons I served on, I never served twice on the same squadron. Can't imagine why. I was on one squadron for a start in UK. Then I went to 4 Squadron as a recce instructor. Then I became a qualified flying instructor on the Hawk, and went to the Harrier OCU, 233 OCU at Wittering. And then I was a flight commander on 3 Squadron back in Germany. So I did pretty well all the Harrier squadrons. 20 Squadron, when it was originally a Harrier squadron, I never went to Wildenrath. I didn't fly with them. And when 20 took over the OCU job, I'd already moved on. The Harrier reconnaissance camera, as a reconnaissance instructor myself, I'm very much pro having a camera in every aircraft. The one in the GR3 Harrier and the T4 pointed out to the left-hand side. It was labelled the PFO, the port-facing oblique camera. And it was a very old camera, an F95, but it was very useful for just getting a quick snapshot of anything you passed. You could also carry a wet film camera pod, which had 5 cameras arranged in a fan, which would give you horizon to horizon coverage. So that was very good, but that got overtaken by modern digital devices. Jaguar in modern air forces, yeah, I mean, the Indians are doing great things with it. It's limited in what it can do, but with bigger engines now, I'll throw in as an incidental, after I'd left the Harrier Force and the Jaguar Force and got into training, I got called back for 2 boards of inquiry. The first one, a Jaguar crashed just after takeoff at Conteshore. Pilot was killed. Second one, GR7, failed to make it back to the carrier on its way to a war through the Mediterranean, ended up in the sea. And in both of those accidents, I was able to say, this accident may not have happened if you'd put the more powerful engine in. So more power is the answer. Those who are old enough might remember Home Improvements TV series with Tim the Toolman Taylor, played by Tim, whose name I've forgotten. Anyway, Tim the Toolman Taylor on cable TV, his motto was always more power. Anything will be better if you've got more power. Just mentioned the Indian Air Force. I did a fair amount of instructing with Indian Navy pilots. External tanks with the Harrier, we generally always flew with them. Soviet fighters, we were briefed on them all the time. Endless morning briefings. My family to see me airborne, yeah, my family saw me, as I did a lot of flying displays, and they were able to watch. Ever against the lightning, another funny story, well, funny in retrospect. I got asked to go and do Dissimilar air combat training with students on the weapon instructors course at Binbrook. And I should have caught on, really. Tim Allen was the actor. Anyway, I went up to Binbrook, and the briefing was, okay, we've refueled your jet. Want you to get airborne, go out over the North Sea, call us when you're ready, and the first aircraft will come up and do a 1v1 against you. Standard rules, briefed all the rules. Okay, so off I went. This Harrier came lightning came roaring up, flashed around at high speed, shot me down. Not a good idea. So now I've got an idea. This lasted 3 minutes. He's gone. He's back for fuel. Okay, I see what we're doing. So I dumped a bit of fuel, called ready for the next one, and as soon as he came in, I suckered him into a low-speed fight, and we started doing a standard backwards and forwards scissors, trying to fly. You try to fly a longer air path than the other aircraft, so that you can gradually get behind him. And after 2 or 3 turns, I was winning this. As he crossed the next time, I saw his nose go down. I thought, now he's got the idea. He's going to run away, and he can run away faster than I can. So I turned back towards him, and no, his nose had gone down, slicing to the left, and it continued to do so. He was now spinning. I've got a spinning Lightning. However, I've got a Harrier, I've got Pegasus, I've got a braking stop. So I put it in the braking stop, point straight down, get some film on his cockpit, albeit rotating. So I've got the kill. And he carries on. I'm thinking, he ought to be stopping this. But then he did stop. And it went the other way. Starts spinning again. Then it stopped again. And I called, "Are you all right?" He said, "I'm going home now." And that was it. He'd gone. Well, I'd still got a fair amount of fuel at this stage, so I went off and did half an hour's low level. I was landing back at Wittering, so went back there and called him on the phone and got him on the phone on his own and said, what height were you at when you stopped that? Because supposedly in a fast jet, if you're passing 10,000 feet out of control, you eject, particularly with the seat they got. And he said, "Oh, I think about 4,000 feet." I don't think so. It looked lower than that to me. However, that's the Lightning. Very impressive aeroplane. The Yak 38 couldn't do much. It really wasn't as good as the Harrier. The 141, mighty impressive, but again, lift engines and lighting up and shutting down, it's just too complicated. I saw the 141 at Farnborough, and indeed, while I was in MOD, they were offering to sell flights in it. I offered it to our test pilots. Not sure if anybody ever took that up. Yeah, the F4 versus Jaguar. That's a well-known one. It was a cock-up. Things went wrong that shouldn't have been allowed to go wrong. The Jaguar pilot went on to be a squadron commander, same time as me at Colt. The water in the Harrier, we had 50 gallons of demineralized water, which was about 90 seconds worth, and it was sprayed in the back end of the engine, which increased the density of the air going through and cooled down the back end, so that you could apply more power. You could run the engine faster, get more power out of it. French fighter, I really do like the Mirage F1. The only one I've flown in, I think, yes, the only one I've flown in is the Mirage 3, which I flew as the Belgian 5. Oddly enough, one of the aircraft I flew in, Belgian 5, now has its own Facebook group. They are bringing it back to flying condition. No, I never in the air saw any Soviet fighters. Biggest drawback of the Jaguar was the engines. It needed more engines. A good comparison with the Harrier was when having done my short conversion course, I arrived at Coltishall. My first trip was QFI checkout in the T-Bird. Then I was given a single seater to go off and fly. which I did off around the usual UK low flying. I'm back in England where I know and love. But it was a 41 Squadron jet, and it got their recce pod, which was a huge bit of kit, like half an aeroplane strapped on underneath. Huge, big, heavy thing. And I flew across the middle of the country at low level, and I hit a flock of birds. I mean, a lot of birds. And I could see that the front of one of my drop tanks was gone. I could see some flapping bits of metal on the side of the nose. So I knew there was a fair amount of damage. That might have gone down the engine intakes, but the engines looked all right. Nearest airfield was Shawbury, so I called up Shawbury, need to land straight away, which I did. I then thought, well, hang on, how long is the runway at Shawbury? This has never bothered me in the past. I've never worried about such things, but this might be a limiting factor. How much fuel have I got? I don't know. How much does this aircraft weigh now? I don't know. Well, I better hope that the drag chute works, which it did, and I stopped. That was fine. I climbed out, had a look at this airplane, and it was in tatters. There were bits off all over the place. So I just called back to base and said, look, hey, this is me. I'm stuck here. Sorry about the airplane. Can you send somebody in a T-bird to fetch me? This one's going to be here for a while. Well, they did. Kindly sent a T-bird to fetch me. Ground crew were dispatched that night to drive there. They took a few panels off, replaced them, lowered the drop tanks, put some speed tape across a few things, and it flew back the next day. The Jaguar, most of the outer skin is not stressed, whereas the Harrier, all of the skin means something. If any of it gets damaged, you're in trouble. So it's a tough airplane. There's an interesting photo I've got of a Jaguar that took a surface-to-air missile in the Gulf War, a French one, and it's got a lot of the back end missing, but it made it back. What else have I been missing? No, Link 16, we never got to anything like that. Nuclear strike was out for me, we never did. FOD was always a big concern. We were very, very careful.
So yeah, Bob, if you want to answer maybe 2 more questions while we wrap up this Q&A, that'd be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, going higher, the Jaguar Harrier Hunter were all limited in altitude by the oxygen regulator, because they did a calculation of what would happen if the canopy disappeared at high level, and that would cause an aerodynamic suck, which would make the cabin altitude even higher than the actual altitude. What's this message here? Can't see it. Yeah, so I think they were all limited to 50,000. I do know that they could all go higher. Vulcan, the only Vulcan flying experience I've got was using a Vulcan tanker. That was kind of daunting, getting close behind the back of a Vulcan in the air. Largest firearm, we only carried a 9mm Browning. That was later replaced by the Walther PPK, which was not good at hitting anything. The Marine Corps fly with a rifle in their seat pack. Most comfortable cockpit, Harrier Jaguar, pretty similar. The Jaguar was a bit more comfortable because it's bigger. The Harrier was a tiny cockpit. Yes, it is me, Peter. I'm still here, still watching. Good to talk to you again.
Absolutely, and what a great way to end. So thank you very much, Peter, for coming in the comments there. But Bob, what an absolutely amazing Q&A, and I want to thank you all for you to join, the comments there. So Bob, thank you very much for coming in. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.